Well, good morning, church. My name is Leandra. I'm the associate pastor here at the Water's Edge. And if you're new or visiting, I just want to extend a special welcome to you today. Craig and I would love to meet you after the service and get to know you a little bit. And also for all of our people watching on Facebook Live, I just want to invite you to the service as well. You're just as much a part of our community here. So I invite you to talk in the comment sections, tell us where you're watching from, get to know each other on there as well. We're all part of this same worshiping community this morning. And we're in our second week now of a series called In God We Trust. And this became our national motto in 1956. I don't know if it was more true in 1956 than it is today, but it certainly doesn't feel that true for our country today. This idea of In God We Trust. I think we trust in a ton of things, whether it's our economy, our military, our government, our natural resources. I think even individual Americans don't trust in God as much as sometimes our 401k or the real estate market or our education or our employer. I think a lot of those things get a lot of our trust sometimes more than God does. And as if that wasn't already ironic enough, of all the places to put this motto, we printed it all over our money. Perfect place for In God We Trust. The one thing that we probably trust in the most of all over God sometimes. And a couple weeks ago when Craig and I sat down and we were first discussing this sermon series that we're going to do for the next 4 weeks, I was thinking, the money sermons. You know what, Craig? How about you take the lead for the next 4, and then I'll come back around Christmas. I'll let you do those. I've never preached about money. You do a good job. I think that'd be great. Here I am, obviously week 2, so we need to work on our communication a little bit. I think I wasn't clearly conveyed what I was talking about. But, I understand talking about money in church can make people a little uncomfortable. A lot of people don't like the money sermons that much. And a while ago, one of my friends, she moved to Chicago, and she was trying to find a new church. And I remember talking to her, and she's like, well, I found this church. I love everything about it. But the first Sunday I went, the whole sermon was about money, and I just didn't really like it. I thought that was a weird place to talk about money, so I don't think I'm going to go back. And I asked her, and I was like, well, what are some things you'd like hearing about in church? Money, cross that one off. What were some things you're expecting? What do you want to hear when you come into church on Sunday? She's like, well, I want to hear about joy or hope or how to have a good relationship with God. And I think all those things are great, but I also think money is kind of talking about all those things. I mean, how many times has money gotten in the way of your joy? How many times has money ruined your sense of joy? How many times have you put hope in money and then it backfired on you? How many times has there been a fork in the road where it's like, okay, I think God is calling me to do this or wants me to do this, but it wouldn't be great for my bank account to do that, and you have this decision of following God or following money. And those situations come up all the time. So I think money is not just a practical issue. It's not just, we're not here to fundraise. I think how we deal with money is really a spiritual issue that comes up in church. And last week we talked about 5 reasons why we talk about money in church. And I think the big one people think of is, oh, they're here to raise money for the budget and tell us to give. That is on the list, I won't lie to you, but it's definitely 5th on the list when we talk about reasons why we talk about money. The first reason is that God is generous, and when we are generous, we look more like God. And really, at the end of the day, that's why we're here. We're here to look more like God, to follow God, and to become the people God calls us to be. And generosity is a huge part of that. The second reason we talk about God is that money is usually the chief rival to God in the world. Like I said, you get that fork in the road, following God or saving more money. There are so many situations like that where people get caught following money more often than God. And it really kind of becomes this rival in the world to God. This one really hits home for me because I remember in seminary, so I'm already in pretty deep with the God thing at this point, right? I've agreed I'm going to go to seminary. I want to be a pastor. I've committed my career, my life to serving the church. And I was working at this church, and they're like, oh, the topic of tithing came up, of giving 10% to the church and this generosity campaign. And I was like, oh, I don't know about that part. And someone who was there was like, aren't you in seminary? You're already totally committed to the church. And I was like, yeah, but I don't know, this money thing, that's kind of, I think money a lot of times is the last thing we're willing to involve God in. Like, I was in seminary before I let God be a part of my bank account. It really becomes this rival to God, and it's really hard for us when the decision becomes between the two things. The third reason we talk about money is because we deal with it every single day. It's 11 a.m. Some of you have probably already dealt with it, thought about it, spent it, received it. We deal with this every single day. And if there's something in your life or in our lives that we're dealing with every single day, we should probably mention it in church every once in a while. The fourth reason we talk about money, I think this is usually the most surprising one, but Jesus actually taught about money more than any other topic in his ministry. When you read through the Gospels, that topic comes up more often than any other topic he teaches about. And I think that surprises us because we don't really picture Jesus as like a spiritual financial advisor who's going to like sit down and go through our budget with us. But he really is teaching and talking about money all the time, and I think it's because of these reasons we already talked about. He knew that it was going to compete with God. He knew people dealt with it every day, so he addressed it pretty often, and we're going to look at one of those lessons here in a little bit. But then the fifth reason that we talk about money is because generosity allows the church to do things only the church can do. We have a team in Uganda right now that's serving people there with medical clinics. That is only happening because of your guys' generosity. We have the turkey dinner later today. There's going to be who knows how many people coming through here, eating, bidding on items, raising money so that our youth can go on mission trips this summer. That only happens because of your guys' generosity. I stopped at the church yesterday, and there were 4 families out on the playground enjoying a playground that was built totally with generosity. Even on Wednesday here, we had a couple hundred youth in here for a worship service. And, that happens every week here, so it doesn't sound that weird. But if you really think about it, like a couple hundred middle school and high school kids coming here on Wednesday night for a church service is actually kind of a small miracle in itself. And that happens here every Wednesday, and that happens because of your guys' generosity. I remember my pastor growing up one time. His name is Mike, and he told me that the best part of his job as pastor is that he is the official thank you card reader for the whole church. He gets to read all the stories of people who have been helped and supported and cared for the church. All those thank you cards come to his office, and I'll tell you that upstairs where our offices are, our tables, there's a ledge behind Craig's desk, and it is full all the way across with thank you cards that he's received. I think most pastors keep like their textbooks up there and stuff. I think Craig must keep his at home or something, but it's full of all these thank you cards that Craig gets. And he is the official thank you card reader for things that your guys' generosity has done. Most of those thank you cards are things that he got to be a part of, but wouldn't have happened without generosity. And Jesus talked about money a lot, and we're going to look at one of those stories now, but I kind of want to start by setting the scene because it's an important part of the story. So at this point in Jesus' ministry, he's been going around for a while. People know of him. He's done a few miracles. He's gotten in a few fights with the Pharisees. He's eaten with some people he wasn't supposed to hang out with. He's kind of got a reputation going. So at this point, when he shows up into a town, it's not like, hello, my name is Jesus. People know, and it's a big deal when he shows up into the town. And so in Luke 12, this is a story. He's entering a new town, and the people know he's going to be there. This is what the scripture says. A crowd of many thousands had gathered so that they were trampling on one another to get to Jesus. Someone called from the crowd, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." Jesus replied, "Friend, who made me a judge over you to decide such things as that?" So first of all, we're going to stop in the story. This guy clearly does not get what's going on right now, right? He's face to face with Jesus. He fought his way to the front. Like, there are people there asking for miracles. There are people there bringing people to be healed. There are people there who like, what's the meaning of life? And then you have this knucklehead who somehow gets to the front and says, hey, my brother's not sharing with me. You need to tell him to give me half of the inheritance. You can see he's a bit whiny. You can see why Jesus was a little thrown off by this guy. And he basically responds and he's like, I'm not Judge Judy here to like, settle all these little scores and fights between you and your brother. I'm Jesus, like healings, miracles. You guys want to know the meaning of life? No, this guy, his brother's not sharing with him. So Jesus kind of writes this guy off, but then he realizes, this could actually be a good teaching point for the people here. He sees this guy's heart. He sees what's happening despite his silly request. And he turns to the crowd and he tells them, beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own. I think we hear this word greed a lot, but I don't think we really fully understand what it means. I know when I first read this, I was like, oh, greed, that's like Leonardo DiCaprio in Wolf on Wall Street. I just picture some guy in like a really nice suit and his hair slicked back, and he goes to the stock market, and I don't know what he does there. But I picture one of those people. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a greedy person. But greed isn't a financial situation. It's not a set of actions that we do. Greed is a system of beliefs that we believe in. It's an attitude that we have towards money. And greed is the inappropriate attitude towards things of value built on the mistaken judgment that my well-being is directly tied to my possessions. That's what it means to be greedy, or to have this attitude of greed. Greed, it's basically like putting a price tag on yourself and saying, I am worth this much, or I'm this much of a person, I'm this good because of what I have. And so that mindset is not based on being rich. There are just as many people that are millionaires and that are making minimum wage that probably suffer from greed. Even someone who's making minimum wage can come home at night and look at their bank account and be like, well, I'm not worth as much. I don't make as much, I don't have as much. Those people are better than me because of what they have. That's what greed is. And this will not be a surprise to any of you, but greed is pretty common today. A lot of people buy into this idea that we're worth what we have, and that if we have more, we'll be worth more, that if we have more, we'll be happier. And they chase after this more. And the tough part about greed, like, I don't think I could come up here today and be like, this is what greed is. Don't believe it anymore. Okay, go. Greed's a lot tougher than that because it's actually really emotional. Like on the surface, greed is wanting more and more and more, but it's really tied to some emotional things. Greed promises a lot of things that we deeply want. Greed promises us contentment, safety, and fulfillment. This isn't just about like, I want the new iPhone. This is us trying to make ourselves feel fulfilled and safe and content through material things. And the great theologian Jim Carrey once said, he's a comedian, but in this interview, this is at the peak of his career, and he says something that's actually really theological. He says, I wish that every single person could get rich and famous and have all their dreams come true just so they could realize that it's not the answer. Because until that moment of when you get it all and realize that it's not going to work, you spend so much time trying to get there because you think it's going to work. And so basically what Jim Carrey says is, I wish everyone would just have it so we can move on and realize that it's not the answer. It's not going to make us feel content or safe or fulfilled. And an interesting part of that interview, too, is he says all the insecurities he had at the beginning of his career, he's like, well, once I'm famous, once I've made it and people think I'm really funny and a good actor and all these things, I won't feel this insecure. He said every single insecurity has followed him all the way to the top. And that's the problem with greed. Greed promises these things and it cannot deliver. The first one, greed promises contentment. Contentment, that idea of like, I'm happy with where I am right now. I can enjoy the moment. I'm in the moment. I'm not, looking on the other side of the fence to see if the grass is greener. Greed promises, you will feel this. Just buy this new thing. Just finally, fill that 401k account. Finally retire. The problem is that it's never going to feel content. You're always going to be chasing. It's always going to be like, okay, the next step is contentment. The next step is contentment until you get to the end and realize contentment wasn't there the whole time. The second thing greed promises is safety. This It's kind of the idea of insurance, right? It's like, well, if anything bad happens, at least I'll have the money to pay for it so nothing bad can really happen to me. If it does, I'll have protection through money, through financial resources. And most of us know, if we think about it, that no amount of money in the world can protect us from something tragic happening in our lives. It can't really protect us from pain and suffering, but we still store it up and we're afraid to give it away because we want that safety of the bank account. And the last one, this is the big one. Greed promises fulfillment. The idea that once I get enough, once I get the new house, the new car, once I go on that great vacation, once I pay off all this debt, I'm going to feel fulfilled. I'm going to feel comfortable as myself. I'm going to feel happy. I'm going to be relaxed. The stress is going to go away. I'm going to be fulfilled. And that's the main idea of greed. Greed is trying to find fulfillment through money and material possessions when it can only be found in relationship with God. So Jesus recognizes that greed is present in this man's life. He's face to face with God, and all he cares about is getting his money. He's not aware of the situation in front of him. And when Jesus wants to teach us a lesson, he usually uses these things called parables. They're like short stories. They're not, a real story. Jesus is telling this story to the crowd to teach them a lesson. There's always a moral at the end. And usually with these parables, there's a character in the story. And at the end of the story, this character ends up being a hero or a fool. And they're the ones who teach us the lesson. So last week, Craig talked about the story of the poor widow who, even though she didn't have anything, she still took her 2 coins and she brought it into the offering and was still generous with what she had. And at the end of the story, this woman was a hero. So parables kind of use the characters as a hero or a fool. Now, this story today is about a farmer. This is what it says in Luke 12. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have room for all my crops." Then he said, "I know. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have enough room to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and say to myself, 'My friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry.'" So let's stop the story here. You guys think this guy is going to be a hero or a fool? Who thinks hero? Nobody? Fool? All right, some of you guys have read the Bible before. So we can use context clues and kind of see that this guy's going to end up being a fool, but think about if you actually knew this person. Some of you probably know someone like this. Let's say there's not as many farmers anymore. So let's say someone started their own business here in West Omaha, and they invested everything they had. They worked really hard. It started slow, and over the years, the company just started building success almost overnight. And before he knew it, this guy could sell the company and have enough to retire comfortably at the age of 50. And this guy's going to sell it, he's going to retire, and he's going to go live the good life. He's going to get a vacation home somewhere, and he has the nice car, the big house, everything he could ever want. And he's retired at a young age. If you knew that guy, would you think they were a hero or a fool? A fool? I think if I knew this person, I would be a little bit jealous of them, and I would really admire them. They worked hard, they got everything they wanted, and they're going to retire, and they're going to live the good life. That would be awesome. And it reminds me of one of my favorite parts of Nebraska is when you come in, you see this sign, the good life, right? I grew up in Iowa, but when I moved here, I remember seeing that sign. I'm like, oh, Nebraska, the good life. And I just love that motto. And actually, when I was looking up for this picture, there was an article of when the new tourism motto was happening. Apparently, Nebraskans got really worried that the good life sign was going to get taken down and replaced. And they fought really hard to keep it up there. So I know, this motto is a point of pride, the good life here in Nebraska. And I remember when Sam and I were moving here in June, I was coming from North Carolina. He was coming from Colorado, both states that think they're better than us. And every time we would tell someone that we were moving to Omaha, Nebraska, they would be like, "What? Why? What?" They're like, "What are you going to do in Nebraska? They don't have oceans. They don't have a mountain. What are you going to do? It's going to be so boring. They don't even have a professional football team." I was like, that is where you're wrong. They actually do have one if you ask any of them. And but I remember when we were moving here, everyone's like, "Oh, why are you moving here?" And I told one of my friends, like, "No, it's the good life." And she's like, "Oh, is that like a joke that they?" I was like, "That is not a joke." Got a little defensive at that point, but since I've been here, I lived here 5 years before, and then since June. But I truly think that the good life is present here. That in Nebraska, we don't have an ocean, we don't have mountains, but I really do think we have the good life. People here know each other, they care for each other, they're kind. People actually know their neighbors and their community. Sam and I recently have been looking to move, and we went and we were visiting a house, and the neighbor came over and like shook our hand and got to know us. Like, we didn't even buy the house yet. And he's already like, "Hello, neighbor, nice to meet you." But I love that about this place. And I remember when I was in North Carolina, it was a few years ago. Some of you guys probably remember this story, but there was a family from out here that was on vacation, and their 2-year-old son died while they were on vacation. And I remember seeing this article on Facebook about them coming home, and just like, I can't imagine what that trip home must have been like for them. And this article was about how the whole community had kind of rallied around this family. Their whole house was decorated with blue ribbons, like up and down the streets of their whole neighborhood. It was decorated, there were signs. They had organized a meal train. They gave this family dinners for like a month, just so it was one less thing that they had to worry about. They had raised funds, they'd paid for the funeral, they'd paid their travel expenses. This whole community, people that knew them well or didn't know them at all, kind of rallied around this family as they were coming home after experiencing this horrible tragedy. And I remember reading that and realizing, like, that doesn't happen everywhere. Like, if you grew up here, maybe you're used to communities like treating each other like that and living together that way, but that does not happen everywhere. Communities don't, care for each other like that everywhere. I remember reading that and thinking, like, that is the good life. Living like that is the good life. And when I talk about greed, the big selling point of greed is it offers its own version of the good life, right? It's like, if you have this, life will be good. And it's very deceiving. We see in commercials and movies and media, it's constantly promising, like, hey, get this, buy this, do this. That's what the good life is going to look like. And it's very tempting for us to want to follow that. And Jesus tells us, I actually have a different version of the good life for you than the one that greed offers. Jesus says, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. And in this story, the reason this really successful farmer ends up a fool instead of a hero is not because he made a bunch of money and retired early. The reason he's a fool instead of a hero is because he spent his whole life chasing the world's good life, and he really didn't spend any time living Jesus' version of the good life. There's 3 main things this farmer believes that kind of get him off track. The first one is that the farmer thought the good life is about what we have, and Jesus says it's about how we use it. In all these parables about money, Jesus isn't as concerned about how much we have. He's not going around condemning, like, you have too much, you need to give away more. He's mostly criticizing or talking to people about how they're using what they have. Are they just using it for themselves? Are they just using it to make themselves comfortable? Or did they use it to make a difference in the world? Did they use it to help other people, to care for other people? I remember my friend told me this story about one time when he was at an apple orchard, and he went to the apple orchard for the same reason we all do, to get pictures for our social media of us out having fun, out in nature with our family. And so he's out at the apple orchard to get some pictures for Facebook, and he's looking for the perfect scene. And he said he found this tree like right at the entrance. It even had the sign. It would have been a perfect Instagram. And so he's getting ready. He's going to take a picture of his kids in front. His perfect lighting. And right as he's about to take a picture with this tree at the apple orchard, someone who worked there like came over and revved up a chainsaw and actively starts cutting down the tree behind them, right in the middle of his picture. And so he kind of goes over and talks to this employee, like, why are you cutting down this tree? It's like right at the entrance. It's big and full and beautiful. And he's like, oh, yeah, well, this tree actually got a disease this season and it doesn't produce fruit anymore. Like, it still looks beautiful, but there's not actually any apples coming from it. And I think the farmer ended up creating a life just like that. It was big, it was beautiful. People were jealous of it, they wanted to take pictures with it, but at the end of the day, he didn't produce any fruit. He created a good life for himself, but he didn't create any fruit in the world. He was just this big, beautiful tree. The second thing the farmer believed is that the more you get, the more you have. When Jesus is constantly telling us, the more you give away, the more joy you'll find. This farmer was looking for joy through his things. And when his barn was full, he's like, well, I got to make room for more of my stuff so that I can have more joy in my life. But Jesus says, you actually would have found more joy if you gave away that extra that you had instead of building a bigger barn for yourself. And as the holidays come up, this is when we're reminded of this the most, because as the holidays come up, we open gifts. That's fun. We like that part. But we know there's nothing like seeing someone open the gift you got them. Like, you spent time, you picked out this gift specifically for this person. You see them open it. That like sense of joy you feel inside as you're watching that. That joy is so much more than getting the new thing for yourself. And I think the farmer in this story, he kind of forgot that. He saw extra, and he's like, all right, what should I do with this? Keep it. And that probably did bring some joy in his life, but he would have had more joy experiencing generosity. The last thing that the farmer believed, and this is the thing that really, really backfires on him, is he believed that having more guaranteed him a happy future. When Jesus says generosity allows us to experience happiness right now. Like, when I think about retirement and 401ks and all of that stuff that I have to think about now, it's always in the future. It's always like, save now for the future. Keep this because in the future you're going to need it. The happiness and fulfillment is always like over there. And someday you're going to get there, and someday you're going to be able to experience it. Jesus said the good life is right now. Like, today you can experience that. You don't have to wait until the bank account hits a certain number to experience the good life. We can have it every day, no matter what the bank account says. And Jesus says that's through generosity. That's through spending time with people. That's through following him. But sometimes we get so caught up in, that version of the good life that I want down the line, that we miss the good life that's happening right now. And I think about this farmer's life, this is not an easy profession. He probably worked hard day in and day out for years. Like, he earned this big harvest. He had a full barn because he worked really hard. But he probably had a really hard life. He worked day in, day out, trying to get to this point. But now it's finally here. He's going to retire. He's going to eat, drink, and be merry. It's finally happening. Listen to what happens next. Well, then God said to him, you fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for? And I think this farmer illustrates a point that a lot of us see or experience, and that's people will use up their entire lives chasing money just to try and enjoy a life that they've already entirely used up. This farmer worked so hard for this moment. He kept everything for himself all along the way, and the moment's finally here, and now he's not even going to get to enjoy it. His good life is never actually going to come. And I think that's what greed often does to us. Like, we chase money, we're always like, oh, someday, once I have enough, I'm going to enjoy the good life. But we get so caught up in chasing more that we never actually get there. Or we do, and it's too late. And that's how he ends up being the fool. It reminds me of one of my friends. He is also a pastor, and I listened to one of his sermons once, and he was talking about his dad. And his dad passed away when he was really little. He never got to know him, doesn't really have any memories of him. But they lived in a smaller town, and his dad was kind of this public figure, so everyone in town knew him. So his whole life was like, everywhere he went, someone would be like, oh, you're Steve's son. Yeah, and so everywhere he went, you're Steve's son, right? And he said every time that happened, it always came with a story, some story about my dad. But it sounded like his dad was a great guy because he would say, they'd be like, oh, you're Steve's son. One time Steve drove me to work every day for 2 weeks when my car broke down so I wouldn't lose my job. Or, your dad sat in the hospital with me once, for a whole day. They'd be like, you're Steve's son. Steve called me every week for a whole year when I was going through my divorce, completely saved me. And everywhere he went, he would get these stories about his dad. And I don't know if my friend's dad left a big inheritance for him. I didn't ask. I don't know if he left any money behind or what the situation was there, but I know that that inheritance would mean nothing compared to the inheritance his dad did leave behind, which is all those stories of the life he lived. My friend is always going to have that story left behind. So, this farmer, he spent his whole life to have this retirement, this perfect retirement that he's now not even going to get to enjoy. My friend's dad spent his whole life doing these little things along the way, and he died younger. He probably didn't get to enjoy a retirement, but he left behind something awesome for his family. And I think his dad really spent less time chasing the good life and more time living the good life. And that's what he left behind. This is how Jesus ends the story about the farmer here. He said, yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth and not have a rich relationship with God. So just like we talked about at the beginning, how we handle money, our relationship with money is so tied up in our relationship with God that we really can't separate the two. And that's what Jesus says here. This guy got on this path because he was so distracted by what the world had to offer that he kind of lost track of following God. This money temptation is not going away for us. As soon as we go and leave from here, we'll see an ad, or we'll see something on social media of someone got this brand new car. All these things, this temptation is constantly going to be around us. We can't just leave here and be like, okay, I'm not going to follow greed, I'm going to follow God, because, this is constantly going to be tempting us everywhere we go. But I think that generosity is kind of like a preventative medicine against greed. Every time we do something generous, every time we act generously, we're reminded, we kind of put money in its place. We're reminded money is a tool to use, and God is the person who fulfills and saves, and not getting those two mixed up. Every time we're generous and we feel that sense of joy, we're reminded, okay, this is the good life. This is what the good life can look like. I did get more out of this than if I had went and bought myself that, or if I had just saved it for some future day that I'm looking forward to. And, Thanksgiving's coming up, Christmas, all these things. There's going to be a ton of opportunities to practice generosity. We have the turkey dinner tonight. We have the turkey bags that people are bringing in for together. I'm sure the schools and your employers, as Christmas comes, they have, all these opportunities to be generous, sponsor a family, bring in donations. All those sort of things are coming up. And I want to encourage you, if you take an opportunity and do one of those generous things, really think about that feeling that you get after generosity, and remind yourself of what the good life can look like. Because I think when we're generous like that, we realize there's more to life than just having more. And the farmer thought the good life meant having the biggest barn, and he was so concerned about I need a bigger barn, always looking towards the next big thing. And Jesus kind of pulls back on the story and says, really the good life looks like having the right-sized barn, and then using the rest to do good in the world. And I can't tell you what the right size barn is for you and your family. It's going to look different for everyone, and that's something for you guys to think about on your own. But as we continue this series, we're going to keep talking about our relationship with money. How do we view money? How do we use it? What do we believe about it? What hope are we putting in it? And I want to leave you with this question. This is what I want you to think about for the rest of this week, and then next week we'll come back and continue this series. But how is chasing the bigger barn gotten in the way of you living the good life today? How right now are you constantly chasing this bigger barn that's preventing you from living the good life today? Where are some areas in your life where maybe you could be producing fruit if you just stepped and took a break from chasing the bigger barn? The good life's tempting, I know that. A nice house and car and vacation, That does sound good. That probably would be enjoyable. Um, but I also want to trust Jesus when he says that I have come that they may have life, the good life, and have it to the full. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. So let us pray. God, we thank you that you know how to be generous, that you know how to be generous with us. That when we make mistakes, when we follow other things, when we forget about you, that you forgive us, that you embrace us. We thank you that your love is generous. You've given us so much, so many blessings, more than we can count, more than we're aware of. We thank you that you set the bar high when it comes to generosity. We just ask that we can look more and more like you every day, that as the world keeps promising happiness and joy through money and through all these things, that we can see that and remember that you promised us the good life, and it's not going to come from that. Help us stay on a path following you. Help us remember the true good life. Help us desire that good life for ourselves. Forgive us for the times when we've chosen other things over that. Lastly, any prayer concerns that people have brought in here, anything on their minds and hearts, concerns, worries, thanks and praise, whatever people have brought in with them today, just take a moment to lift up all those prayers together, the silent prayers on our hearts. We thank you for being a God that hears all of those, that cares for us, that loves us, that never leaves us, and that has promised us a truly good and fulfilling and satisfying life with you. And so we pray together the way your Son taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever.
We want to thank you for joining us for worship this morning. I want to wrap